So how much did the current Eskom board know about that Ruyter-initiated investigation into corruption at the utility, and have we actually become any wiser about the true extent of corruption at the utility through the hearings with the Standing Committee on Public Accounts this week? Let's speak to Michael Marchant, Head of Investigations with Open Secrets South Africa, ZA, excuse me. Michael, a very good evening to you. Welcome to The Pulse. So that investigation that André de Ruyter knew about, it was funded by Business Unity South Africa. The people who've appeared before Scopa this week either knew it existed but hadn't actually read it for themselves, or had no idea that such a report had been commissioned and finalized. How helpful is it then?
Good evening, Tembekile, and good evening to those watching. I think that the last 2 days have left us with, unfortunately, more questions than answers about who within the board, within law enforcement, and within the greater structures of Eskom were aware or were not aware of this investigation. I think that at a more fundamental level, what this raises is it raises the difficulty when you have the capacity of law enforcement so eroded that state-owned enterprises and other entities in the private and public sector are increasingly privatizing investigative function. And so now we have, this report, the evidence of which ideally should be tested by a thorough law enforcement investigation. But we're already starting to see moves from the elements within the state and law enforcement to kind of sideline it on the basis that it was procured in, yes, not the ideal fashion via private means. And I think it raises that fundamental question that if you are going to tackle issues of economic crime, state capture, and organized crime, you need the law enforcement agencies to be doing it. But again, they largely seem to come to Parliament wanting to obfuscate and not willing to take responsibility for the fact that this investigation, that they should be on top of it and they should have been engaged with it for many years already. Mm-hmm.
But the other issue with that report, based on what we've seen, for example, in work published by the likes of the team at News 24, the one point of controversy is the fact that one of the people apparently involved in the work done is a former apartheid operative, so that's already a red flag. They're also saying that much of what's contained in there does not have enough, shall we say, meat to prove any sort of, or to support, shall I say, the allegations made.
And this again comes back to this issue, which is that we do not want issues of high profile and high level corruption and economic crime being investigated by private investigators. There is a particular issue you have here, for example, as you've said, where you're worried about the leadership of that particular entity. But even when it comes to firms that have a better reputation, for example, the large audit firms or the large private law firms that often conduct these types of investigations, they may have some of the skills, but there are very often concerns around conflict of interest. And of course, you are then still left with the problem with that report now unearths a huge amount of information, but how do you act on it? You need law enforcement to act on it, to undertake proper investigation and full prosecution. And so you are then left betwixt and between, where you have a certain amount of information, law enforcement says it can't be acted upon, and the boards of state-owned enterprises in between, again, not seeming very willing to move these things on quickly enough.
The former board chairperson, Professor Makgoba, says that he was told, word of mouth, about the existence of this report, as was the Public Enterprises Minister, Pravin Gordhan, Security Advisor, Sidney Mufamadi, among the people who knew about this. Why is it that when they were informed, they did not pursue getting their hands on this report to read it and perhaps have an appropriate agency look into the veracity of the claims?
It's an excellent question, and I think it is the fundamental question that we should be asking of all the actors involved in this. Frankly, it's outrageous that you have public officials, both at the level of Eskom, within law enforcement, within cabinet, who increasingly say, well, yes, I was broadly aware of something, but it wasn't my direct responsibility. The reality is that load shedding and the rampant corruption and organized crime at Eskom is disastrous for this country. It is one of the greatest risks currently facing the nation. And yet we have a group of individuals who refuse to take responsibility, as you say, for, if they were aware of it, of taking leadership to enforce some kind of action. Instead, what we have, I think, as you've described, is that everyone treating it like a hot potato and trying to pass the responsibility on to someone else. And ultimately, that's, I think, a failure of leadership at all levels, both within law enforcement, within the cabinet, and within Eskom.
And today, the current board chairperson, Magwana, spoke about the establishment of an inquiry that would be chaired by a retired judge. Is that our only hope at this stage of trying to get to answers? And, I mean, that process on its own would take quite a bit of time. So how soon can we get answers?
Again, I think that there may be merit in some instances of establishing an investigation like this headed by a retired judge if it is adequately resourced. But again, I would have, and we would have, several concerns with it. Number one being that it again introduces a step between the investigation being undertaken in this case and law enforcement agencies actually acting upon it. And again, of this question of, are we in 6 to 9 months' time going to be in the same situation where we have further parliamentary hearings and law enforcement agencies say, oh, well, we broadly knew about it, but no one's directly brought it to my attention. And I think that Parliament, SCOPA, and the other parliamentary committees now need to front and center be calling the political principals and the heads of our law enforcement agencies to say, you know, forget the independent, the private investigations. What are you doing on these cases? And provide us detailed updates and progress reports and explanations as to why you're not acting where you aren't.
Michael Marchant, good to speak to you. Thank you so much for your time.